Today in the briefing room, Sean and I spoke with retired Colonel Enrique Oti, who was employee number 1 at the US Defence Innovation Unit. In this episode, we unpack his 23-year Air Force career that took him from special operations to 2 years as an Olmsted Scholar in China to Silicon Valley at the exact moment the relationship between Washington and tech had broken down. Enrique shares what the original DIU got wrong, why every Ministry of Defence around the world is making the same mistake right now, the real difference between dual use and pure defence tech, and what Second Front Systems is building to make AUKUS Pillar Two a frictionless reality across US, UK and Australia. Welcome to the briefing room. Whether you're in defence, investing into the future, or simply curious about how great ideas become reality, this is your mission briefing. Let's get started.
Yeah. Enrique, you've had a super impressive career, 23 years in the Air Force. I met you in fall of 2014. Before we go there, but you were a cyber warfare officer, China foreign affairs officer, and you started off, or at least where we met, you were a national security affairs fellow at the Hoover Institution in the fall of 2014.
Yep.
If you wouldn't mind, can you tell us how you got to that point in history and what were some of the things along your long and winding road that got there?
Wow. So it was definitely a long and windy road. So going back, so how I got there. So my career started always knowing I wanted to serve in the military. And so I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 97. I'll be honest, I started off as a computer science major and then realized if I kept down that path, I was not going to graduate for a lot of academic reasons, or probably more important, living a lifestyle that wasn't conducive to academics. So I ended up switching to being a history major, which is actually, to be honest, I love tech, but I'm actually a huge fan of history. So I became a history major, graduated Air Force Academy. And again, early career, worked in special operations, doing IT work. I got to do psychological operations and military deception. Again, so my career started very weird early on. Went down to Honduras. I was a Latin American foreign area officer initially. I went to Afghanistan with a special operations task force. So, standard military early career, weird jobs. You kind of do whatever they tell you to do. Things really kind of started changing for me. I got selected to go to China in 2007. This is kind of where my career really shifted. I did 2 years in China as an Olmsted Scholar, which means the military sent me to do a graduate degree at a Chinese university in Chinese. And I was there from 2007 to 2009 as China is trying to show itself off to the world during the Beijing Olympics. And I got to see a whole world of China that I always viewed them as they're kind of a company that copies everything else, delivers cheap products around the world. And then once I was there and I was at the university for 2 years, I'm like, wow, this is real. They're growing, and I think it's going to be a threat. And so I rolled out of China to Pacific Command in Hawaii and started working really kind of my cyber warfare background, IT background. And I started looking at Chinese activity. And this is where I started checking out what are Chinese doing to invest in US tech? How are they stealing US tech? How are they exploiting the US economic system to grow their economy? And I think, I'm not saying I'm the first person, lots of people have looked at this. I was probably one of the few people in the military that was looking at this at the time, and it really kind of opened my eyes. So after I did a command in an intelligence organization in Korea, my bosses were basically looking at me saying, hey, why don't you go to Silicon Valley? Why don't you continue to look at this China stuff? And while you're there, why don't you check out some of the software stuff, this tech stuff, because we're doing intelligence collection, intelligence operations, and man, our systems are decades out of date. And so that's when I went to Stanford University for a year at the Hoover Institutions, where I met people like Sean and others. And this is kind of where my worlds of cyber and China kind of merged in what is Silicon Valley is this incredible mix of academia, technology, money. And so all these things kind of blended together for a year and really kind of set me up going forward with where I am now.
I was just going to ask, when you noticed.
Oh, well, Enrique, so thank you for that additional context and getting us to that point in your career. Now, you currently serve as the Chief Strategy Officer for Second Front Systems. Walk us through how you were employee number 1 at DIU and how you eventually became the Chief Strategy Officer. And if you wouldn't mind, tease out how specifically DIU got it right and wrong when it first started, and how you were there with a front row seat.
Yeah. Oh man, the front row seat. So there are, how do I put this? You can ask 100 different people about DIU, and somehow they'll all say that they were there at the beginning and how it started. So what I'm going to give you is my perspective on how DIU got off the ground, and then what kind of we learned from that, successes and failures. So when I was at Stanford at the Hoover Institution, this is right after the Snowden hacks. And this is, you had the relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. was really bad. It's at a super low point. Sean, I think you were there. We were at an event where Eric Schmidt, time CEO of Google, was talking at the Hoover Institution, speaking to the director of the NSA who was visiting Silicon Valley. And in front of the director of the NSA on stage, Eric Schmidt says the goal of Google is to make sure that the NSA can never hack them. And it was really interesting that that was their perspective. It wasn't that they were talking about the Chinese or the Russians. They were talking about how do they protect themselves from the NSA. And you kind of see this culture going, wow, there's something wrong here. And so I started writing some papers sent back to the Air Force because I'd have been a foreign area officer in Latin America and China. And so my argument is, if we treat Silicon Valley like a foreign country, what we really need to do is kind of have a forward operating base or an outpost there where we have people that act as attachés, learn the culture, build the bridges, understand the relationships. So it wasn't really about tech. It was about culture. And I started passing these papers back, and it finally caught on. Now, to answer, Sean, the really interesting question is like, well, then what happened? Not good. I'll tell you, early DIU was an organization that could not decide what its mission was. The Air Force guys, we thought we knew what our mission was, which was to honestly define technologies. The Cyber Command team was out there to really rebuild bridges that had been burned with the Snowden incident. And you have a Department of Defense team come in who I think was unclear other than giving tours to visiting dignitaries. And that first year was rough. Well, we couldn't get any authority. And obviously the very famous event, the Purge, where SecDef came in, fired most of the team at DIU. Obviously a few of us remained. We made the cut. They bring in Ross Shaw and Chris Kirchhoff and others to basically lead this new DIU 2.0. And we said, okay, it's not about hanging out and giving tours in the Valley. It is really about delivering capabilities to the warfighter. How do we break down all those barriers to deliver capabilities? And honestly, that process is 10 years in the making. We are only now seeing a DIU that has the processes, has the authority, has the budget, has the political capital to really deliver amazing capabilities. But honestly, a lot of that started when we did that kind of DIU 2.0 kickoff in early 2016.
May of 2016, yeah.
Yeah.
And just to add a couple of data points, Peta, for you and the team here on the call. Interestingly enough, this Eric Schmidt factors in very prominently. So the thing that also DIU today benefits from is an ecosystem that it actually helped curate, where you have the leading firms up and down Sand Hill Road, multiple entrepreneurs that have made billions of dollars from engagements with DIU that are now sort of serving as the guardian angels, both on Capitol Hill, in the Pentagon, and various other strategic places, right? So there's that. It took a long time to get there. So DIU 1.0 were blessed with people that had multiple letters after their names. They were used to doing things the way the government did things. They had one senior person who had a meeting with this guy who's getting ready to leave Apple by the name of Tim Cook, and this person blew it off. A couple of days later, this same person had a meeting with this guy, the aforementioned Eric Schmidt, and blew it off. To where Eric gets on the phone and calls then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, God rest his soul. If you get this wrong, you will be dead to us in Silicon Valley for another generation. Now, the number one metric that the Department of Defense team, that leadership had, was number of meetings.
Number of meetings.
Number of meetings. In Silicon Valley, the one thing that you don't have is time. And if you're on conversation number 3 and there's no acquisition authority and there's no deal on the table, you are officially wasting people's time, and then you're eroding the brand. So that Control-Alt-Delete that Ash did, I think it was actually May 14th, 2016, was truly game-changing, and the rest is history. So I'll stop there.
And I will make a comment on that. And I think, Sean, you're right about what is your metric of success? And this is what I'm seeing as obviously, I think DIU set a precedent around the world of how a military can operate with dual use tech and defense startups, even like pure commercial startups. But what's really interesting is seeing innovation organizations stand up in countries all over the place. And I've met a lot of them over both my time in government and my time in the commercial markets. I've met with innovation hubs, innovation front doors, whatever you want to call it. Every Ministry of Defense around the world has one. But most of them are making the same mistake that DIU did, which is it's about engagement or partnership or relationship building versus it's about deploying capital. And it took DIU a while we figured out real fast we needed to. We just didn't have the authority to. When DIU 2.0 rolls in, we had the authority to deploy capital, but it's just a small, I think it was 30 million. It was like the entire budget to operations and deploy capital. And now it has like $1 billion. But I'm seeing that all over the world, innovation front doors, they hold meeting after meeting after meeting, and they are going to continuously fail until their governments give them the authority to deploy real capital in big numbers. And because again, if you're a venture capitalist, why would you invest in a startup if you know that the only thing they're going to do is get 10 meetings with the government? Like that's not growth, that's not scale, it's not investable.
Yes, look, it sounds like a very familiar story. It's not one that is different here, that's for sure. But I've got a couple of questions around the first iteration of DIU. You mentioned Bucky. I don't know the surname. But I know that when things work and there are some key people who are good initiators or instigators and facilitators of these types of processes. And then, Sean, you mentioned there was a whole ecosystem that wrapped around this to enable this level of activity. So what would you say is probably the most key, apart from the ability to deploy capital, inside the ecosystem, and maybe some key players? Is there some key roles or some key things that people should be looking out for? Let's just say we're sending a message to other countries, states or governments who are looking to be able to facilitate this process and achieve really good outcomes. What are the key ingredients that you need to have inside that ecosystem?
There's one key ingredient, everything else is supporting. It's the right people. This is a mistake that I'm seeing in too many countries where they try to develop the perfect process or the perfect organizational structure. But then what helps that? It's not about the structure. It's not about the processes. It's about the top cover and the authority. One of the greatest things that DIU did was when the Secretary of Defense, again, when Ash Carter said, DIU, you have policy waiver authority, you have budget authority. If you have any kind of problems, you can call me directly. And when you tell a leader that they can call you directly, and if they have a problem, just drop you a note or something, you actually see someone who will take risk. Because right now, if you don't believe that you have leadership top cover, if they have not explicitly told you that you have the personal support from the Prime Minister, the Chief of Defense Staff, why would you take risk? Because there's no upside. You take risk, you just get abused by your peers or your superiors. And so this is so the most important thing, hire the right radical and then give them the support that they know that they can act and fail and they're still trusted. And I think that's where I think a lot of organizations really fall down is they don't have that top cover.
Spot on.
Such good insight. I really appreciate you sharing that. It's not something that we don't know, but I always like hearing it back again from someone else who's seen it from really different perspectives.
Yeah.
The only thing I would just add with regards to Bucky Buetow, so Bucky is now a 2-star general in the California National Guard. He just recently stepped down as the military deputy to the head of DIU. So he's now a strategic advisor to Owen West, who is the latest, leader of DIU. This past year at Space Symposium, Peter, there were 15,000+ people that were there down at the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. There are 3 people in the world that are why there were 15,000 people that were there. Gwen Shotwell, the president and chief operating officer of SpaceX, Elon Musk, and Major General Bucky Buetow. Most of the new space ecosystem that exists around the world was largely enabled by DIU, specifically Bucky Buetow. So getting back to Enrique's point of having the right people, Bucky knew where all the bodies were buried, both at the state level and also at the federal level. And because we were blessed with the authority to get companies on contract, Capella Space, IC, most of the dual-use unicorns that exist out there, especially in the space domain, are largely tied to Bucky Buetow and the great glass breaking that he did.
Yeah. Powerful. Good. We need to identify more of those type of people, but also they have to have a desire to get involved, right? And have to have a desire to want to, like you said, go and have an impact and be driven to achieve something in that space as well.
Well, actually, people talk about like how hard it is to recruit people in the government to do this kind of work. I actually disagree. It's actually not hard to recruit people in if they know they can have an impact. That's the key, because like the kind of people who do this sort of thing, yeah, money's important. People love being in startups. People like making money. But people are driven by mission. That is human nature, that you want to know that you have a purpose and that you have an outcome in your life. And if you bring someone in from the outside saying, look, yeah, your pay is going to suck, but you know what? You can build the future that you think is right, and we're going to give you the money in the top cover. You will have people come in and build that future. The problem is we don't tell them that. We tell them, hey, we want you to take a pay cut. We want you to come in. And no, we're not going to let you work remote, and you can't hire your own team. We're going to give you people around you that we choose. And if you want to spend any money, you have to get it approved through 8 layers of bureaucracy. Like, as long as you do that, you're not going to get the good people. But you give them freedom of action, man, the best people in the world would love to come and solve the problem, because most of them care about the countries they live in. They want to be passionate. They want to succeed.
Yes, 100% agree. We talk a lot around the US market, Australian founders going into the US market, what we get right, what we get wrong, what we should be doing more of. There's a lot of similarities there, and then there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But you've spent a lot of time in both markets. What would you say to Australian founders, or advice and how to approach actually going into the US market, getting on contract? And that can be anything from cultural shift, mentality in terms of the energy they may bring or not bring. What would you advise to Australian founders who are staring down the barrel of embarking on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about there. So again, I'll talk defense market, not market writ large, but talking about going into the US defense market, a couple of things. The first one is, the Department of War is pretty open to foreign companies. There's a lot of foreign companies getting under contract. But one of the things that people usually like to see is, do you have traction in your home country? If you don't have some kind of traction, the question is, why are you coming over to the US if you haven't proved anything? Now, it's a little different if you're as a company saying, you know what, yeah, we're Australians, but our goal is the US. We're not going to deal with the Australian market. Sure, like people totally understand that. But if you've been around for a few years and you don't have success in your own country, there is a question about, well, what makes you think you're going to have success in the U.S. Department of War if you haven't made it in the ADF? So there's that kind of credibility of you as a company and as a founding team and as a technology. Coming into the U.S. market, I'll give you a big positive on Australians. Australians kind of have that American vibe of a little bit of outgoing, a little arrogant. It actually plays pretty well. Which is different than when I talk to British companies too and coming to the US. Like a British company coming to the US where they downplay their backgrounds, they downplay their technology, they're very self-deprecating. Like, come on, guys, that does not sell in the market. Like there's a certain like, I'm going to come take over the world kind of thing that I think Australians put off that vibe. And I actually think it's received very well in the US. So like from a cultural perspective, I think it's a fantastic fit. So getting into the US market is a couple things. You have to have partnerships, and whether that's hiring an advisor or partnering with a company that is an expert in this, you have to have partnerships. It is really hard to break in unless you know the ecosystem. The US market is a bureaucracy. In many ways, it's a faceless bureaucracy. There's 100 ways in, and it's just navigating the structure. And so a lot of people come in and say, you know what I need? I need general officers on my board. Okay, interesting. But having 5 general officers on your board of directors or board of advisors, it may look cool and the VCs may be impressed. But then you try to break into the market and you realize those generals they can tell other generals, you should try this. And they're like, oh yeah, let's do this. And then it goes down to the staff and everything dies. That's not the way into the market. The way into the market is actually at that lower level. Those people who have been in the weeds in the program offices, those GS-13s, GS-14s, those majors, lieutenant colonels who have now gotten out, but they have executed multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar defense programs. They've done contracting actions in every weird way. Like, you have to get the right mid-level advisors who have worked the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of contracts and procurement, and they know every secret pathway in. The last one is basically those advisors should hopefully tell you this. There are front doors into the Defense Department that are wide open with lots of money. Defense Innovation Unit is there, AFWorks is there, CyberWorks, SOCOM has organizations. There are plenty of front doors into the Defense Department. Your advisor should push you through those front doors. They should not be telling you, hey, go talk to this general, then talk to this general. Like, there are front doors. That is a great path in. And once you've got that path and you got that foothold, now you can do all that massive amount of senior leader engagement, all that kind of stuff that to expand. But there are doors that you should be going through to get that money early, prove your technology early, and then try to expand.
I am interested in the comment around, have you made it in your home market first? So let's just say, for Australians, have they actually worked with the ADF? Now, that's a difficult thing. And I'm interested to hear what Sean thinks of that comment in particular, because this is the question that gets asked a lot. Meaning, say if they're dual use, could they have been on contract somewhere else? Could they be working, have a commercial contract, maybe not with the ADF, but another organisation here in Australia? So it's not that nothing is being not tested. It's being tested. It's in market, commercialised, but they've been globally focused from day one, always with a desire to go to the States. So maybe haven't spent the time, and it is a long journey to work with the ADF. So I haven't actually heard somebody say that could be a deterrent before. Have you heard that, Sean?
Let me make a quick caveat on that. And this is a terminology caveat. I will caveat dual use versus defense tech. Yes. And Sean has heard me give this speech. We use the term dual use a lot. I don't think we should. Most of the stuff we're talking about nowadays is actually defense tech. There's a real market for pure defense tech. And I think a lot of times someone uses the term dual use washing. Like, we call it dual use because we don't want to potentially upset LPs that are uncomfortable with military tech. But I think those days are over. If you have an unsophisticated VC or unsophisticated LP that doesn't understand that there's a real market for pure defense tech, then I think it's a little wrong. So I think we differentiate. So what I was giving you here as examples, probably more defense tech focus. Like, if you're building a killer drone, let's prove that you've done it. Unless you're targeting the foreign market first, and you're not even.
We are the VC firm that is 100% with you on the defense tech. I mean, we were named the most controversial VC fund for that very reason here in Australia. So I completely understand the language, and I understand why lots of people use dual use or previously have done, and definitely there's a lot more defense tech. It was just more in terms of the size of the market. So if you're Australian, coming from here, working with the ADF can be quite difficult, very long, whereas the time spent, if you're going to get on contract, you hopefully want to do it in the States where the end goal is a bigger market. And if you're going to spend time anywhere, maybe spend it there. So I was just interested to hear your thoughts on that. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I want to pick up on. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point, Enrique, and just sort of level set everything here. It's really hard to get on contract with the ADF or get on contract in any meaningful way, right? I think the sort of middle bowl of porridge here is that if you can get a government grant from the Australian government in some capacity and then leverage that to bring it into the U.S. market, that's a really strong thing that I think resonates quite nicely with folks. I think the complicating factor is that because you've gotten that grant from the Australian government, if you're an Australian founder, you think that process is one-to-one, apples to apples in the States. And both you and I know that if you get a government grant, in this case, a Small Business Innovation Research grant, that is not an endorsement whatsoever of your technology or capability. It is actually to foster the development of that capability, but that in no way is going to get you on a program of record trajectory unless you do a lot of what you just articulated, of knowing the inside game, of actually knowing how to leverage the contracting officers, knowing how to leverage the professional staff members on Capitol Hill to get certain things done, right? And so I think that that's sort of like the fine line there. Just with regards to semantics of dual use versus defense tech, as you and I have talked about, Enrique, and what we uncovered at DIU, 90+% of what the Department of War needs comes from the commercial sector. Yes. Especially when you start talking about things that the hyperscalers produce and produce very well, right? And so I do think that dual use is a very alive and well thing. I think, though, because of the great work that you did with Kessel Run and other things out there, there is now this exclusive subcategory of defense tech focus. And yes, the LPs are in fact warming to that. But you do really need to have folks that understand all facets of the equation in order for us to get past the blood-brain barriers that exist both in the Commonwealth of Australia and then also here in the United States. So
I think, and well, part of this is, look, I've seen a lot of early stage company pitch decks. And I think one of the issues that I've seen is, does a company understand who they are? And so I'll kind of go against the terminology here. Are you a defense tech company, which is mean you have decided that you're going to build a product for defense? Like, are you building a missile? Are you building a military drone? Are you building an ISR collection system? There's the idea of being a defense tech company, and there's an entire world of these neo-primes that came out of saying, we're going to build, but we're going to build like a startup would build, like Silicon Valley would build, but we're building defense tech. There's then also the world of obviously dual use, which in my mind implies your commercial capability that then the military uses in its commercial sense, because the military, like you just said, Sean, like 90% of what militaries do is commercial. HR, logistics, supply, medical, finance. It's all like, why would you build your own? Just use the commercial market. So I think that's what I view like dual use as, utility in both markets and kind of equal utility. But then there's another play, which is like potential dual use, but it's defense first, which is, you're going to expand to the commercial markets later, but you think your entry point is defense money because a lot of it is, NRE, a lot of it is grant money. You can actually grow a business off of government grants and government money. Start with the defense, knowing that you're going to expand into a commercial market. And actually, there's a lot of drone companies in this place as well. They know there's a commercial use case. The real key is for the founders to know, which one are you? Because what you see is a lot of founders, they burn money trying to target multiple customer bases, multiple environments, multiple governments, rather than saying, where am I going to focus first to drive that initial revenue before I decide to expand? So that's where knowing who you are as a founder and as a company is actually critical, so you don't actually blow your raise going too many paths.
Such an important way, such an important thing to think of. And I think founders in that early stage could be lured one way or another if there's some grant funding or funding for research or whatever that may steer them towards that direction, even if that's not the direction where they want to end up. So having those conversations early about this is so vital, or them hearing it put that way is really, really important. So I'm glad you've brought it up and explained it that way from an investor's perspective, long term, because it says more about what their mission is and are they aligned for the long term, because that's realistically what you're going to be investing in.
Sorry, Jose, let me go back on one thing. Something's just triggered here. There's one of the things we didn't talk about. We talked about like an Australian foreign company coming into the U.S. market. It's this whole thing called security clearances. And so my mind has changed. My mind is always open to change over time. I used to think that as a startup, you want to avoid working with the prime contractors. And that was always my thought, because there's always this view like, we're not them, we're different, we're doing things differently. True, maybe on the tech development roadmaps, maybe on how agile you are, maybe on some of the technologies you're different. But the primes are primes for a reason. They know how to do certain things and certain things extremely well. Contracting, partnerships, as Sean brought up, congressional engagement, and security clearances. And so something as a startup, especially entering the U.S. market as a foreign startup, something to consider is partnerships with primes. And again, a few years ago, even my current company, Second Front, I was like, we shouldn't really partner. We've realized that that's one of the best paths to market, both in the U.S. and actually internationally. And so it's just something to consider as the companies are coming in. It's like, primes, they're not bad people. They're trying to do the job. They may be doing it differently. So you have to choose wisely. You have to make sure you have a good lawyer. But it helps you break into a market. Your first contract might just be as a sub, but that shows work, that gives you traction, and then you can scale. You can have that prime hold your clearances, because it's going to take you 2 years to get a facilities clearance and get cleared engineers. And so there is a part of entry to the market is, again, making that going in eyes wide open of like, do I want to risk partnering? Is it the right path? But it actually is a path.
And I want to build off of that, because there is a perspective that Australian founders have dealing with primes in the Commonwealth, even if they're U.S. domiciled primes, but it's the Australian satellite that's operating, that primes are insidiously evil, right? And what we at Beacon Zone constantly say to our portfolio companies and other Australian innovators that are looking to break into the U.S. market is exactly what you just wonderfully articulated, Enrique. Using an American football analogy, let those primes be your offensive line. Let them block and tackle. Let them open up the holes for you to drive through because they have those relationships, right? So Enrique and I have worked extensively with Chris Moran and the team over at Lockheed Ventures, right? 2 years ago, I had a great conversation with Chris during South by Southwest, and I asked him, how many folks are on the Lockheed Martin government relations team? He thought for a few seconds, and he came out with a number of 425. That's almost one person for every member in the U.S. House of Representatives. Most startups, especially most Australian startups, will never get to 425 people. So Lockheed Martin has the ability to kill you via Capitol Hill here in the States if you run afoul of them. So why not go ahead and cooperate and graduate and get them to be on your side and be that force for good for what you do?
Really interesting take, and definitely something that, like I mentioned, it's always going to be helpful for founders to be aware of these things early on when they can start to build those relationships. Who knows where it's going to end up? But if they could have a different perspective and not know that they're not always going to be the enemy, but maybe work with them earlier than they ever perceived that they might want to.
You just made an interesting comment. You never know where it's going to end up. This is one of my biggest failures of my career overall.
Well, Enrique, I just wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about what you and the team at Second Front are actually doing to make governments more efficient, make companies better collaboration partners with governments actually out there. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing a few high-level thoughts on that.
Yeah, happy to. So look, Second Front as a company actually started back in 2014 by a couple of former Marines. And the whole idea was like, why are they going into combat with kit that is outdated when they can use some really cool modern tools on their iPhones and iPads that are coming out of their friends in Silicon Valley? And so the company started with the idea of like, how do you consult Silicon Valley tech on working with the government, and how do you consult the government on working with tech companies? And they did that for a while. Then they realized, you know what, it's an issue, but a lot of people are tackling that in different ways. What the real problem is, even after companies get a contract with the government, they were finding that tech companies could not deliver their software to the government. And this is something we saw at DIU early days, which was we'd find some amazing Silicon Valley technology and then realize it's incompatible with how the military and DISA ran its cloud. And it's like, okay, great. So we found it, but we can't run it. Or we find some interesting technology, try to get it deployed to a military network, and you have security officials saying, well, it has to go through the formal accreditation process. There's a backlog. It'll take you 2 years. And so as a company, we made a shift a few years back saying, you know what, we're going to solve that. We're going to go from let's help people work with the government. Let's actually technically solve how they deliver their software to the government. So we built a platform that sits on top of military infrastructure, whether it's unclassified, secret, top secret, whether it's cloud, whether it's edge. Our platform sits on top, and we can take commercial capabilities. We integrate it with our platform services, which includes identity access management, observability, security, secrets management, infrastructure management. Now we're doing like AI model access. So all the stuff that would happen at that platform layer above the infrastructure, we coordinate that, we manage it, we deliver it to the application. And in doing so, the application inherits everything from us. And in inheriting security, inheriting observability, inheriting infrastructure, it also inherits that accreditation. So we can take these accreditation timelines that can sometimes take 1.5 years or 2 years, and we can get them down to months or weeks. Our most recent one is we are now under contract with NATO, and we deployed a capability out in support of NATO Diana. We deployed them out in 17 days. 17 days from we received their software to when it's up, operating, and accredited was 17 days. And again, we do this in the US at multiple levels of classification. We're in the UK, we're running pilot programs right now with the Royal Navy and the British Army to do the same thing over here. And then, so I think what we're looking at is eventually we'd like to move into the Australian market where we provide capabilities to Australian government entities. But right now, I think especially in this conversation about Australian companies coming to the US, I think in many ways we provide that quick path where an Australian company can deploy on top of our platform and we can make them available and accredited to military and government end users in the United States at every level of classification.
I think that you could go a long way of actually making AUKUS Pillar Two a reality, right? Of being able to go ahead and bring together the UK, the US, and Australia into a pretty seamless way of actually making things happen. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think you've been reading my internal vision documents on where we take the company. But yeah, I think AUKUS Pillar 2, especially, look, AUKUS Pillar 2 is about technology, and there is discussions about reciprocity, about clearances, and reciprocity about security. And so, yeah, for us, that is a vision of like, if we have our platform running on the US network, the British network, and the Australian network, then there should be no friction from a policy or compliance standpoint to allow technologies to operate in all three environments. So yeah, we believe that is the future. But a lot of times it is an education piece for governments to understand how that works.
And so not to necessarily hash out, a go-to-market joint strategy with you here, but I think we at Beaten Zone would love to continue this conversation specifically on how to make AUKUS 2 a reality, because I think, again, it's going to take the public and the private capital markets coming together to achieve these national security outcomes. And so we would be honored to work with you. You choose the continent, you choose the engagement. We're here to help. So.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, we can come see you guys, there in Australia. I'd love to engage locally in the ecosystem there with the defense companies, with the venture community, because for us, that is that logical next step. We have a great presence in the UK, a great presence in the US. The logical next step for us is Australia to really kind of complete that triangle for AUKUS. And so I think there is a good play there for us as a company. And I think more importantly, as an alliance, this is the right thing to do. We cannot keep going to war where each nation is struggling at different cadence speeds to bring different technologies to market. It just doesn't work. Like, technology is moving too fast. If each company is targeting something different, and each country has a different timeline of how they get it live. So I think we could help out with Pillar 2. And I think, like you said, I think the VC ecosystem is a big part of this. Like, as VCs understand which companies are best positioned for that multinational approach, because at the end of the day, venture companies really do pick winners. That's how you make money. That's how you survive as a VC. And I think governments often are hesitant to pick winners. And we hear this conversation all the time. Like, government doesn't want to pick winners. They want open, fair competition, all this stuff. True. But to help the government make better decisions, as the VCs back the right horses, I think we start growing a tech ecosystem of companies that are culturally aligned by a vision of what it means to be part of the geopolitical West, democracy, freedom, and capitalism. What companies that support that and are actually geared for multinational deployments. I think that's how we grow a great ecosystem and a great future for our countries.
Enrique, this has been an excellent conversation. I look forward to having more with you, especially let's hope we make it in person next time.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd definitely love to have an in-person conversation. Look, I appreciate the invite. I appreciate the time to talk to you guys. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, let's keep it up.
Excellent. Yeah, the insight is extremely valuable. The more we can keep sharing what we know with founders, not just founders, but you did mention briefly there, and we don't have time to go into it today, but we do want to spend more time talking about opportunities for defence personnel stepping into the commercial landscape, getting involved in this sector. I know that you mentioned it briefly before around some of that skill set, and that's something we'd like to focus on here as well, is upskilling or providing opportunities for them to come into this sector in particular, because there's so many skills there that we need from all sides, but we don't see a great deal of it. Yeah.
That's a whole other hour-long podcast, but
that's a whole other episode.
That is a passion area for me, because there's how do we, part of us serving our service members is making sure that they have a good future when they get out. But that means us making sure they understand how to act and what to do when they get out. And so, yeah, it's a great area of conversation for a future or for a drink. Yeah.
But appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Sean, did you want to wrap anything up?
No, this has been an exhilarating conversation, Enrique. It would be awesome if you can join us in the Gold Coast. No, but thank you so much for your insights, and it's been a privilege and an honor to know you for a decade plus and see where all the great things you've been able to achieve, and let's keep it going.
Excellent. Good talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, and cheers. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks for joining us in the briefing room. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the people shaping our national security and future capability. If you liked what you heard, Please follow the show, share it with a friend, and join us next time for more stories and insights from the front lines of innovation. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep building the future.